kept thinking, reading it, like, why doesn't Trump just take him to Washington to keep him quiet? I mean, I kept thinking of Trump's stupidity and how close Trump keeps flying to the sun. I mean, he's individual number one. So Trump's own DOJ knows all of this. They knew all of this the whole time. Pecker becomes an immunized witness. I mean, why does Trump, and I guess it's this pathology that Mary Trump talks about, that you've talked about, his penchant for putting people through the shredder is as central to how we got here today as anything that he did, Claire.
Well, and also, I think you have to remember that when Trump walked into the White House, he was a little overwhelmed. He would never admit that. But, he was worried about surrounding himself with the right people, having the right people around him so that he didn't do something that was obviously stupid. Well, it turns out that was impossible. He was going to do obviously stupid things fairly much from day one. But the point is that, Cohen was the fixer of the dirty stuff. He was the guy he sent out to do the yucky, mucky, horrible SHIT. And he didn't really want that person close to him in the White House. He wanted to give off this aura that I'm now president of the United States, and I have not been a serial adulterer, and I have not committed sexual assault, and I've not had, women come forward and say things that we've paid off to keep quiet. He wanted to distance himself from that. And in order to distance himself from that, he had to distance himself from Michael Cohen. And that was no problem for him. Michael Cohen was expendable to Donald Trump. Everybody is expendable. Ask Mike Pence. Everyone's expendable to Donald Trump. But to your
point, Claire, he doesn't rid himself of Michael Cohen. He spends the whole presidency trying to find another one. He turns Reince Priebus into a Michael Cohen. He has John Kelly. He wants John Kelly's project to be to fire Jared and Ivanka because he didn't want to do it. He may have thought he wanted someone else, but he ends up turning these people that he thinks he should be surrounded by into people that'll do what Michael Cohen would do.
No question, he cannot change his need for a Roy Cohn or a Michael Cohen or whoever is going to do his dirty work. He needs to have somebody around to do his dirty work. That doesn't mean he didn't have some fantasy that he thought somehow now that he was president, it was different. And that's what I think was going on. I mean, he will always have somebody around that's expendable to do the dirty stuff he didn't want to do.
But we also learned today he blinked because he did all that. He was savage to him. I mean, purposely, cutting his bonus by 2/3. And Cohen went to Weisselberg and complained bitterly. And you have to imagine that Weisselberg told Trump, you've got a problem on your hands. You do not. Because why did Trump go through and sign all the 9 checks, et cetera? He was persuaded, I think, that Cohen was a problem for him. Otherwise.
I think that's right. Well, I think he paid the money. Typically, he wouldn't pay that money, right?
No.
He would have stiffed him.
Weisselberg said, pay him so he stays silent. You don't want this hanging out there. He could testify.
But the irony is he didn't want to pay the guy who paid the gal to stay quiet about sex with him. I mean,
because he thought he owned him.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to put up, we did some work showing where Cohen simply corroborates. So where Cohen simply corroborates the first witness, who was David Pecker. Pecker testifies, first witness in the trial, I think it was April 23rd. Quote, my conversations with Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen would call me and he would say, we would like you to run a negative article on, let's say for argument's sake, Ted Cruz. Then he would send me, he being Michael Cohen, information about Ted Cruz or Ben Carson or Marco Rubio. That was the basis of the story. This was my favorite part. And then we would embellish it from there. To be clear, when we were preparing an article, let's say for Ted Cruz, we communicated what we were going to do with the direction of the article with Michael Cohen. We would also send him the PDFs of the stories before they were published so he could see what direction they were going, what they were moving to, and he would comment on them. And then David Pecker was asked, did AMI preview for Trump and for you the stories that we're going to run in their magazines and periodicals? Cohen says yes, basically the same exact testimony given by David Pecker. Can you describe a few that you recall specifically to benefit Trump, some stories that were either negative about his opponents or positive for him? Michael Cohen, some of the negative ones I would receive from David Pecker or Dylan Howard were Hillary Clinton wearing very thick glasses and some allegations she had a brain injury. There was Ted Cruz, a photo of his father with Lee Harvey Oswald, claiming that Ted Cruz's father was involved in the assassination of JFK. There was an article on Marco Rubio in a swimming pool with a bunch of other men, claiming that they were having a drug binge of some sort. Did AMI send over the covers of some of these stories to you before they ran? Yes. Now, I know we're dealing with the elements of the crime, Yasmin, and the elements of the crime are the falsification of business records and the establishment of motive. But I'm old enough to remember when this would amount to a political scandal big enough to be our top story. And so I just wanted to pull it out in the context of the Republican sycophants who got Trump trial duty today. I heard there were a few. I'm waiting to see if Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz are going to pull that card and have to come up here at some point. But the evidence of the conspiracy to smear and just how coordinated, I mean, his COVID response wasn't this tightly planned.
It was incredibly tightly planned. And the interesting part was, even with Susan Hoffinger's line of questioning in the lead up to that testimony that you just read, she initially asked, was there any kind of campaign with AMI, for instance, in which you would put negative stories out there with regards to folks that Donald Trump wanted to smear? And Michael Cohen, in fact, said no, but then they went on to the conversation, that crucial meeting in 2015, in which Hope Hicks, by the way, testified to as well, in which she was a part of that meeting briefly, and then she left, between David Pecker, between Michael Cohen, between Donald Trump, in which they talked about those stories that you just mentioned with regards to Ted Cruz and how coordinated this whole thing was. Nicole, one thing I wanted to touch on as well with regards to the credibility issue when it comes to Michael Cohen, I think it's something that we have underestimated up until this point, right? We've talked about how Michael Cohen was going to be the star witness, but understandably has these credibility issues, of course, because he is a convicted felon. He has lied under oath, something, of course, they're going to bring up in cross. But if you think back, and I think we cannot stress this enough, with the Trump civil fraud judgment and Judge Engoron, in that judgment, he stated, I find Michael Cohen credible. And we saw that today, Nicole, on the stand from Michael Cohen's testimony. I think the question is going to be how, in fact, it plays when it comes to cross-examination. But you're right. With regards to the coordination and the lead-up to 2016, it is astounding to think about the details. Now, whether or not those details can, in fact, be corroborated, right, or the jury believes Michael Cohen at his word is really the question.
And I mean, Harry, I guess, again, I say this every hour, the jury will determine everyone's credibility and whether the case has been made. But to believe that Michael Cohen is out there lying, they'll have to also believe that Hope Hicks is lying. They'll have to also believe David Pecker is lying. They'll have to also believe Keith Davidson is lying. They'll have to believe that everyone that corroborates a piece of this is in on it.
They'll have to believe that Alan Weisselberg was ready to defy Donald Trump and make all these plans. They'll have to believe, because of how Trump has played it, that Stormy Daniels is lying. I mean, it's now Trump or everyone else. They played a terrible hand that way. One very interesting point, by the way, about Pecker and the coordination with Cohen, there's something called a rule against witnesses. Cohen's coordination is not because he's studied. He hasn't been able to know what the other witnesses have said, and there was a point where you knew it today. She asked him, did you go to Pecker to complain about your bonus, et cetera, which Pecker testified he had. Cohen said, I don't remember. So, you know, it really came through that that's an independent recollection that he has.
With Hope Hicks as well.
Yeah, that's
right.
And
in fact, Hope Hicks, her testimony could have gone poorly for the prosecution, but there were nuggets in there that really helped build their case.
Totally.
And Michael Cohen today offered even more voluminous evidence that was documented of the amount of communication he had with her about this fear they had that the Access Hollywood tape would derail his election chances.
5 calls that morning.
And then all the communications where they're coming through Keith Schiller as well when the Wall Street Journal reports about the relationship with Karen McDougal. No